So hi everyone, hope you're doing well. For those of you who've joined us in the past, you'll see my background's a bit different today. I actually escaped after Rosh Hashanah, the lockdown with a friend to Istanbul. So we're hanging down here for another week or two, figuring that if we can, better to come back in the lockdown and be dude and write out the rest of it. But, and he's on a call with his law firm right now, otherwise you get a view of the Bosphorus behind us. But today, because we're going to take a break for the rest of the Chagim, I just want to go over some of the stuff we've gone over in the past few weeks, and then really leave it up to you to answer any questions you might have. Really want to keep this as open to you all as possible, as we always do. This is meant to be as user, as participant focused as possible, so answering any questions you have. We have lots of great suggestions that you've already sent in, and after the Chagim, we're going to get to them, and I'm really excited to go through all of them. But today, I really want to be a review because we're going to break for the next few weeks for the rest of the holiday season. So with that, if you have any questions while I'm talking, the group chat window is there for you. Please write in there, and I'll get to all your questions, and then I'll break as well. Whether it's hard for you to type or for whatever reason, raise your hand and we can get to your questions orally. So with that, I mean, we've certainly covered a lot, right, in the last year and in the last, since we've gone online. And I thought last week we did Blessings and Curses right before Rosh Hashanah, which is very traditional for this time of the year for sure. And I thought with everything going on that we would do yet another review of the words related to the virus, because often every week someone has a question about it. Either they haven't participated in the past or they've forgotten for whatever reason. So I want to share that also because in the last few weeks, Nefesh B'Nefesh has been recording our events so that you can review them afterwards. Whether you do or don't write down the words as I bring them up, the vocabulary or a screenshot. This is a great way to review some of the words, and now that you have it a little bit more for posterity. So go through that, try to keep it positive, of course, and then answer any questions you have, not just about current events with regards to the virus, but any other questions you have. All right, so with that, let me open up the one that we first started quite some time ago. And I broke this down into a couple different categories because, because there is a difference, and those of you who watch the news or follow the news, even in English, you know that there's a difference in how the politicians talk about it, how the experts talk about it, how ideas become policy or don't become policy or don't become law. And it's important to know when you're reading the news, and we talk about this a lot in this class, right, about media literacy, how to read the news in Hebrew. It's not just a direct translation, it's understanding what words are being used and why. Likewise this. So we started off, as you may have seen, if I can move the bar a little bit up so you can see, there you go. So at the bottom, I called these verbs speculation verbs, right? Because speculation, just like in English, it doesn't necessarily mean it's happened, much less it's going to happen. And that's what all these verbs mean. And we see these verbs again and again when we're talking about the virus, the government response, local response, other agencies' responses. And it's important to know when you see these words, when to pay attention, when something is actually happening and in place versus when something is on its way to happening. These are some of the classics that you see again and again in the news, both written, both on the radio, both on TV, that really help you understand when something is actually happening versus it's just speculation, like this category is called, right? So the first one is mistamen, right? Row 3, right here at the top, mistamen. Mistamen comes from our word from last week, siman, simanim. Remember, siman both means a sign. It also means something auspicious, meaning it's forecasted. It has to do with a lot of predictions and prophecy in Jewish tradition, but siman in this case actually has a very similar meaning. Mistamen means looking likely. It's the best way to translate it. It's looking likely. And you'll see this a lot in the news, right? You'll see a headline and it'll say mistamen colon, and then it will give you what either has been leaked to the media or that the media has been able to analyze that is going to be the next steps with regards to addressing the virus or very much anything else. You see this a lot, right? We saw this in the last few weeks with regards to the diplomatic accords that were reached between the Emirates and then Bahrain. First the Emirates, and then there was a lot of speculation of mistamen, and then colon, another country is going to sign an accord, and then it was clear it was Bahrain, right? So mistamen is used a lot by the media, so it's a very good word to know. Another word that's very similar in meaning is ha'aracha. Ha'aracha, or if you can't say the resh, ha'aracha. Ha'aracha is actually the verbal noun. It's the gerund, it's the ing version of leha'arich. Ha'arich and ha'aracha both mean to value, to estimate. They come from the word erech. Erech means value, right? And in this form, I don't want to get too much into grammar because a lot of people here, we're at very different levels, but a lot of beginners. This form is causation, meaning that we're giving something value, right? And so to give something value means we're estimating it, right? What is an estimation? We're determining based on what we have at our disposal what something is, what its value is, what its worth is, what its importance is. So that's ha'aracha. Ha'aracha is an estimation, an assessment, an evaluation. It still isn't necessarily rooted in something that's about to happen, but it's nonetheless leading towards something's going to change. It's like mistamen. It's looking likely. This is the estimation based on the facts available. The next one is another speculative word, but we're getting closer to something actually tangibly happening. And that's shoklim. Shoklim comes from the verb lishkol. Lishkol is, as you can hear, and it says here in the notes, it comes from the same root as shekel, right? Every Hebrew word has a three-letter root, a shoresh. In this case, it's shin kuf lamed. And shin kuf lamed comes already from the Bible, from the Tanakh. We already have shekel as a weight and measurement that's used in used by the Israelites, and then certainly in the land of Israel. Shekel, like many currencies around the world, was a literal weight. It was a unit of weight. It weighed a certain amount, and that was a value that other things were priced against, whether we were buying it, selling it, and so forth. Shekel in modern Israel has become our unit of currency. We're actually in the new shekel from the 80s after a long period of inflation. But anyway, shoklim means to literally weigh, to weigh something. So when you go, for example, to the shuk, when you can go to the shuk, or you go to the supermarket to get something weighed, you ask them, Efshal lishkol li, could you weigh this for me? Okay, but weigh can also be weigh in a abstract sense. So you'll see this often, this verb used as like, members of the Corona cabinet are weighing new restrictions against movement, or the police are weighing new guidelines with regards to demonstrations. So it's weighing, just like we use the word weigh in English, right? It's not just a literal weighing of something, it's also a figurative weighing of something. And the next two verbs, these are also gerunds, these are also INGs, like ha'aracha, and they sound really similar. There's a very, very slight difference between them, and they actually have a different shoresh, but when we use them in modern Hebrew, you don't hear the difference. The first one actually has to do with assumptions and speculations. It's assumption, it's hanacha. Hanacha means an assumption. Lehaniach is to assume, and this is the verbal noun, is hanacha, an assumption. So again, this is another speculative word that you'll see a lot in the news, hanacha. Hanacha, some of you will maybe, raising your hand or thinking, I know that word from a totally different place. The other word that I was talking about that it sounds familiar to is hanacha, meaning a discount, right? When you go to a store, a supermarket, or something is offered to you, you'll say that there's a hanacha, there's a discount. They come from two different places. Lehaniach, to assume something, comes from a different root than a discount. A discount is literally to ease something off you. And anacha is a different verb, but just note that they sound very similar. It's going to be hard to jumble them up in meaning when it comes to context clues, but they sound exactly alike. They're certainly, as you see, they're written exactly alike, and they won't be written with vowels, so they really look exactly alike. Okay, these are some of the classics that we've seen in the last 6, 7, 8 months with regards to the virus, that when it's talking, the news is trying to get ahead of what's happening by talking about something that's speculative. It's not actually happening yet, but it may be happening. And so it's great coverage for them. It gets us maybe prepared, if not maybe a little anxious, but these words are also good. So if you are someone who's becoming anxious from the news, right? When you see these words, you can know almost immediately nothing has actually taken place. And that's a very important thing for many of us to keep in mind. We're so saturated with the news and being online all the time. We often, blur things and we immediately jump on something the moment it becomes quote unquote breaking. Sometimes it's not breaking. Sometimes it's just the news and the media trying to get us to pay attention for their various needs. Okay, this is all in juxtaposition to this next column, this next category. And these are ones that actually these are action verbs, meaning that these are things that are taking place. You should pay attention because something is happening or is about to happen. The first word we have is hora. Hora or hora is he instructed. It's the same root that we get the word Torah. It's the same root that we get the word for teacher, more, or mora for female teacher. It's also for parents, by the way. Hore, hora, horim, parents. They all come from the same root, which have to do with instruction. All of these things have to do with instruction. So hora, this first word in row 3 here, is he instructed. Okay, horata would be she instructed. I'm not going to go through all the verb conjugation I've shared with you in the past conjugation tables online. And it's an important word because by the time you get to hora, it has the weight of law. We've talked about this before. A hora'ah, this next word that you see in that same line, hora'ah, is an instruction. We're going to, I think, have this word in the noun section in a second. A hora'ah is an instruction. It in any context, right? It's instructions in a recipe. It's instructions for if you go to IKEA, aka IKEA, and you need to put something together. That's hora'ot, instructions. But when it comes to the virus, a hora'ah is an instruction that has the weight of law behind it. So if something says that it's a new hora'ah, you have to follow it, or there are legal consequences. Okay? And that's in juxtaposition to this next verb, row 4, which is hincha. Hincha in everyday Hebrew means instructed, facilitated, guided, a little bit sort of nicer words. It is very close in meaning to instruction, like hora is. And you see this verb a lot in the news. Hanchayot. Hanchayot are, as you see in the next line, is simply the verbal noun of it. It's the noun. Hanchaya is an instruction or an ordinance or a highly suggested, a strong suggestion. Hincha is basically instructed without the rule of law behind it. It doesn't have the same weight as hora when it's talking about the virus. So if something is in the news and you see this verb, hincha, or hanchaya, it's verbal noun, it's important to follow. But if you break it, it's not necessarily going to result in a fine or, God forbid, imprisonment or anything else. But it is a strongly worded suggestion with regards to what to do. And so you'll see these two words being used a lot. The news is most of the time very good at delineating when something is hora and when something is hincha. Hora is the strongest, form of it, meaning that it's a directive that has the weight of law behind it, and hincha is the step right before that, is we're getting to the place where this is legislated or this is approved by the government to be the rule. Okay, some other verbs that we see a lot when covering the news, especially when it comes to the virus. Chiev, row 6 means forced or obligated. You may know the word chova. Chova is both, chov is a debt, chova is an obligation, so something that you owe to someone else, right? So obligated, forced. The next one you see a lot in Hebrew. Again, not just because of the virus, but this is a very common verb is darash or darash. Darash means demanded. Okay, that's a great one to have, demanded. So instead of, so for example, someone asked me today on Facebook in Hebrew if I needed to go into quarantine upon arriving in Turkey. And I said, instead of saying, Ani lo tzarich likanes lebidud, I don't need to go into bidud. I said instead, Turkey lo doreshet likanes lebidud, that Turkey does not demand to go into quarantine. So it's saying almost exactly the same thing, but demanded is a much more forceful thing, right? It's not on me to decide, it's the government, it's the agencies, it's the other organizations, it's the other people with authority who are saying what you can do and not do. So darash, demanded. Then we have the two classic words that we hear again and again. And as we talked about before, Hebrew is a very, we've talked about the importance of those three letters, the shoresh, and that in Hebrew, spelling is destiny. You cannot mess up spelling in Hebrew because you'll end up in the following situation with rows 8 and 9. Rows 8 and 9 are two words that we hear again and again and again regarding the virus, and they have the exact same three letters, just in two different forms, in two different orders, right? The first one, nidbak, is from the root dalet bet kuf, and nidbak means he was infected or he contracted, as in he contracted the virus or was infected by the virus. The other, bet dalet kuf, is he was checked, nivdak, nidbak, nivdak. Okay, it's a very important rule. Even if the letters sound similar, and there are those letters in Hebrew, right, that sound similar to one another, there are no substitutions, right? Like a menu in a restaurant, no substitutions. You have to spell according to the order of the shoresh, otherwise you end up with a very different verb, meaning altogether. In the case of nidbak and nivdak, right? Because you could be nidbak, you could have contracted it, but you may not have been checked yet. You may not have been nivdak. And you may have been nivdak, you may have been checked for the virus, but you didn't nidbak the virus. You didn't contract the virus, right? So very important. Spelling is destiny. We talked about this before, in full awareness that some people have a hard time learning languages, particularly those who have dyslexia. And that's something to keep in mind. Those of you who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, Hebrew can provide a challenge with that, but spelling is very important. You can't skip it when it comes to the letters that make up the shoresh, the three-letter words. Okay, and then three more verbs here that end on a little lighter note. So obviously the better one is hechlim. Hechlim, this root, row 10, hechlim means to recover. He recovered. So he recovered, as in he recovered from the virus or any other disease, is hu hechlim. Okay? And one of the very nice things to say to someone who's sick, whether it's sick, God forbid, with the virus or anything else, is you probably know the expression refuah shlema, or maybe targish tov or targishi tov, depending on the gender of someone, a really nice thing to say to someone, and this is irrespective of gender, so no need to conjugate, is this this expression here in row 11, Hachlama mehira. Okay, Hachlama mehira, Hachlama, recuperation. Mehir is the adjective for fast or speedy. So Hachlama mehira, may you have a speedy recovery. It's a very nice thing to say to someone who's sick, regardless of what they're sick with, right? But it's not just saying Talgish Tov, right? Talgish Tov, feel well. That's not necessarily saying recover. It's just saying, I hope you get, feel better, but doesn't mean recovery. This is, we're saying, have a speedy recovery, just like we say in English, right? So Hachlama Mehira is a great thing to say. This came up, I guess, in the context of teaching this a few weeks ago, but always important one to do, especially with fellow Olim, because this always tripped me up until I learned the difference. In Hebrew, we have, Hebrew is a very, how shall we say, it's a very conservative language with regards to the number of words, not just in relation to English, which seems like it always has new words being created, right? Hebrew is a very conservative language with both the length of words, but the amount of words as well. There are exceptions to it, and this is one of the exceptions. So if we're talking about recuperation, we also talk about to finish, right? Whether that's to finish treatment, to finish, God willing, the virus, whatever it is. And in Hebrew, we have two verbs that mean to finish. We have ligmor, or ligmor, you can't see the resh, and lesayem. Now, I don't know, everyone's respective Hebrew education here, whether you're in Ulpan, you were in Ulpan, you studied before, you studied after. When I started learning Hebrew, which was first and second grade in Hebrew school, in Sunday school, we don't call it Hebrew school anymore, but Sunday school in Washington, D.C., you learned the verb ligmor. Now, you weren't learning from a native Hebrew speaker all the time, but you were learning 1980s, 1990s, you were learning this verb, ligmor. Ligmor does indeed mean finish, to finish, as in Gmal Chatima Tova, right? We're about to celebrate Yom Kippurim, which is how we say Yom Kippur in Israel. Gmal Chatima Tova. Gmal means finish. Chatima Tova, Chatima is a signature, and Tova is good, right? We're wishing everyone a good inscription in the book of life, with the whole tradition of what's supposed to happen on Yom Kippurim. And so we say Gmal Chatima Tova. It's a very nice thing to say, or Gmal Tov, you'll also hear. Ligmor and Lisayim both mean to finish. It is almost always appropriate to say Lisayim and not Ligmor. Always. I would say 99% of the time. If you are someone who's using Ligmor, stop immediately. How shall I say this in the most delicate way? Ligmor has to do with a biological function and not actually finishing a task. If you can think a little bit more creatively, you can figure out what I'm saying. If you need me to say it more directly, I'm happy to do that when we get to questions. But basically, if you're finishing an assignment, if you're finishing a task, if you're finishing anything, it's lisayem. It is not ligmor. And it's definitely, you're saying, you want to say, I finished something, or I am finishing something. As a male, I would say, ani mesayem. As a female, you would say, ani mesayemet. Do not say, ani gomer, or ani gomeret. Okay, that would be the conjugation for ligmor. Again, if you need me to be a little bit more blunt, happy to do so. Okay, a few more, and then I want to take questions. So, yeah, let's do these. Let's do some nouns, right? We did these nouns ahead of the first lockdown, but I think they're important to know because, again, they're obviously in the news. They're not, unfortunately, not going away anytime soon, but it's important to know. So this first verb, let me put this down so you can see. Sorry, there we go. Okay. This first word we have over here is hitpashtut. Hitpashtut means spread. Lehitpashet means to spread out or to become spread out. Hitpashtut is, again, that verbal noun, the act of spreading out or the spread. So you'll see this word a lot. You saw this in the beginning of the virus's entrance into Israel, the hitpashtut shela negif, right? Negif is the word for the Hebrew word for virus or virus. Hitpashtut shel corona, the spread of corona. Hitpashtut is also the same verb lihitpashet, not just means to spread out, it also means to get undressed. It's not going to be too confused in context, but just know it means something else, and it's the exact same root, and the exact same word, in fact. Hitpashtut, lihitpashet is the infinitive. It means both to spread, but also to get undressed. Okay, next word, magefa. Magefa is a plague, or in our contemporary context, pandemic. I like to use the word plague in English because it's as much a biological function as it is a sociological function, why the virus is so spread out as it is. But pandemic, it means the same thing in Hebrew. Magefa is a word that we've had for many, many centuries in Hebrew. This is, by the way, not the word that we use. We talked about this before Pesach. This is not the word that's used for the 10 plagues of Egypt during Pesach and in the Tanakh. That's a different word. That's makah. Makah in modern Hebrew means a hit or a strike or a beat. Magefa is not that. It's a pandemic. It's a plague in the medieval and now contemporary sense. Okay? And what causes a magefa is something that holds the same root, is a negif. Negif is a virus. It's the Hebrew word for virus, negif, not a computer virus, but an actual biological virus. So whether that's the flu, whether that's pneumonia, whatever virus it is, whether that's HIV, negif is a virus. And both of these words, magefa and negif, you can hear they have similar letters in them, and you can see it as well in Hebrew, the Hebrew on the right-hand side. They both are related to the word guf, right? Guf means body. And so they're all the idea that, what is the negif? What is a virus? It is a foreign body. It's a body that goes into your system and makes you sick and can cause a magefa. It can cause a pandemic. Okay. Obviously very important words, but you will see, you will not see as much, although I think people are getting a little lazy now in using virus again, virus. But negif is the appropriate word when talking about the coronavirus in Hebrew. Or you'll just simply hear corona, but negif is the proper word in Hebrew. Okay, the next word, thankfully, we haven't heard since the first lockdown, which is behala. Behala is panic. We obviously don't want that. Obviously, in the first segel, the first lockdown, there were a lot of people in behala. We thankfully have not seen that in the second lockdown as of yet. We've seen a lot of other reactions, but panic has not, thankfully, been one of them. And then the next one, I'm sure we all know this word by now, whether unfortunately we've had to deal with it or a family or friend has had to deal with it, but it's certainly in the news all the time, is the word bidud. Bidud means isolation, or in the context of the virus, it means quarantine. Now, quarantine, as you hear, has a very different root. Quarantine comes from, it's either Latin or French, from 40, because the idea was to separate 40 days away from a population if you were sick. Bidud has the same idea of isolation. It comes from the word boded, bandad in Hebrew, all of which mean alone, isolated, apart. So it's the same idea. Obviously, bidud isn't 40 days like quarantine, the word itself implies, but it still nonetheless can be translated as quarantine. Okay. This other word, again, unfortunately has come back into our lives because of the new segel, and we're going to get to that word, of course, in a minute, is chalat. You've probably heard this word chalat a lot, that someone, ani bechalat. I'm not on chalat, but someone will say ani bechalat, or something along those lines. Chalat is an acronym. right? We always know it's an acronym because of these two apostrophes. If you look here on the right-hand side, on row 8, those two apostrophes between the next to last and last letters always indicate in Hebrew that it's an acronym. That's how we show acronyms in Hebrew. We don't do capital letters. We don't do periods. We use these two apostrophes. Chalat, as you see, stands for Chufsha Lelo Tashlum. Chufsha is vacation. I'm working from abroad, but we're still sort of calling it Chufsha, but it's not really. Lelo is we've talked about this word a lot. It means no, it means without, it means none. We use it when we're saying something is without before a noun. And this next word, tashlum, means pay. Right? So chufsha lelo tashlum, when you see this word lelo, and we see it a lot in modern Hebrew, we use it before a noun. That's in comparison to that other word you probably know, which is bli. Bli you typically don't see before a noun. Lelo you do. So lelo tashlum, without pay. Right? So chufsha lelo tashlum is vacation without pay. The word in English for that is furloughed. In Israel, because of the negif, you can be on chalat and you are receiving certain benefits, including unemployment, but you're not unemployed yet. You're on furlough, which has its differences in meanings. Those of you, unfortunately, who are on that, hopefully the new plan is that while chalat payments will still continue, companies will be more incentivized to hire back people than they were after the first segel. But chalat, unfortunately, is a word that we're going to have in our vocabulary for a while. Hanshama is also unfortunately coming back in the news because of the rise of severe cases of the virus. Hanshama means resuscitation. It has to do with the resuscitating intubation is the word you see, the fancy word, intubation, the act that you need to put someone on a respirator because their respiratory system is failing because of the virus infecting them. So hanshama comes from the word nishima. First off, nishama we normally translate as a soul. It can also be related to the word for breath, which is nishima. Those of you who take yoga, and you take yoga in Hebrew, and you hear inhale and exhale, right? So inhale is linshom, to breathe is to breathe, so nishima. And she'ifa is exhale. She'ifa is also an aspiration, not just aspiration, you aspire out air, you aspire to do something. They're two great words in Hebrew, nishima, she'ifa. So those of you who want to take yoga, you've already learned how to follow the most basic instructions of it. And a great thing to do in general, especially dealing with the virus and bidud and the segel. This other word, unfortunately, has evaded us in Israeli society. We are not known for this in general. We did a good job perhaps at the beginning of the virus, but we are a very communal people, so it's hard for us to do this, which is richuk chevrati, or richuk chevrati, if you can't say the resh. This is our term in Hebrew for social distancing, richuk chevrati. Richuk is from the same root as rachok, which means far away, or lehitrachek, which is to become distant. And chevrati, the word chaver, friend, chevra, society, chevrati is social, is the word for social in Hebrew. So richuk chevrati, social distancing. This next word, we know it unfortunately all too well, segel. We've stopped using the version hesgel, the second one in row 11, and we only use the version segel now. And segel, as you all know, is we're translating accordingly as a lockdown. It is not a curfew. Segel, by the way, is from the verb lisgor, which is to close, like to close the door. but it's using as a lockdown. It doesn't have to do with an actual lock in a door. That's our English version of what this is. Segel means closure. We just translate it into better English as a lockdown because that's what our context in English is. And then this other word we had ahead of Pesach several months ago. Thankfully, at least as of now, we don't have it at least as strong as it was for Pesach, where remember it was only 100 meters you could go out. And we were told before Rosh Hashanah was going to be 500 meters. Now it's a kilometer. Now it's this. It's even more complicated this time. But basically, this other word, the more strict, the more extreme version of a segel, is an otzel. An otzel or otzer is a curfew. And this word you'll see regardless of the virus or not. If there's a curfew imposed by the police or curfew imposed by the army, this is the word that you use to show there's a curfew, right? You have to be in your home by a certain hour. That's what a curfew is. Okay, so with that, I want to stop because I see we have a bunch of questions, both about what we covered, but I also want to give you all as much time as possible to ask any questions about this or any other topic we've covered in the last few weeks before we break for the rest of the holiday season. Okay, so let me stop share. Okay. Okay. Okay, so Lorraine asked about the nun, the dot inside the nun. So let's just say it's a really complicated grammatical term. And it just shows the difference between one meaning, which means assumption, and one meaning that means discount. But yeah, it's quite complicated. I can't even answer it in full. I can only answer it very partially, and native Hebrew speakers don't even necessarily know how to do that. Steve asks about dolesh. Dolesh is a great word. Like I said, you see it a lot, this root, and you'll see this word darush. Let me write it in the chat window for those who are following along there. So if you're looking for the want ads, right? If you're looking for employment ads in Hebrew, you're going to look for something that says drushim. Let me write that in transliteration. Drushim, right? So we said that darash is he demanded. Drushim is the passive form of that. So something is demanded, something is required, something is requested. That's help wanted ads, right? Wanted, right? Wanted, desired, needed. And that's the name that we use in Hebrew for the wanted ads. So if you're looking for drushim, you're going to see this. You might also see it spelled slightly differently. It's going to be spelled like this. It's going to be, instead of the plural, which is drushim, it's going to be often like this. Darush or drusha. And it's being gender inclusive, right? It's saying that, because according to Israeli employment law, any employment, unless it has something that can only be done by one gender because of some immediate need that has to be explained, has to be inclusive to both men and women. And so therefore they'll write darush dash drusha. So it's understood that it's gender inclusive, right? So just making it clear that it's open for everyone. Okay. So that was darush. How many times have you gone to a store only to find out that it is nigmal? Okay, great question. So you will hear nigmal. Nigmal is it's finished, and that's okay. That is perfectly wholesome, doesn't have any double entendre or any innuendo connected to it, nigmal. The fancier way to say, and you'll see this especially if you shop online, right? If you shop online and something is out of stock, it's going to look like this, and I'm going to write this in the chat windows again. And in Okay, it's going to say azal mehamlai. Azal means ran out. It's a verb. It means ran out. So if you are buying tickets somewhere, like you're buying tickets, remember those days when we used to buy tickets to concerts, and tickets sold out, it would be azlu, right? The tickets sold out, akaltisim azlu. And azal is referring to mlai. Mlai, which is this next word in this expression, means stock. S-T-O-C-K, not stock like you cook with or stock that you buy on the stock market. Stock as in the contents that a store sells or whatever they are selling online. So if something says azal mehamlai, it means it's out of stock. Okay, so it's this is the more common way that you'll see, especially shopping online, that something is out of stock, right? It's finished, but it's more appropriate to say it's out of stock, meaning it may be still be produced, they just don't have it available for purchase right now. Okay, that was a great question. Vicky asks, everyday example when you would use ligmor. Like I said, you don't. Ligmor, like if I need to say this more bluntly, ligmor is a sexual term in modern Hebrew. And it means to finish. Hopefully that's understood. Awesome. Great. Steve asked, what's the difference between behala and behelem? Okay, behala, that word we had before, is panic. Behelem, and I'm going to write this in the chat window so everyone can see. Behelem is behelem. Behelem means shock. Helem is shock. Behelem, in shock. So ani behelem, I'm in shock. That's different than panic, of course. Behala is panic. Helem is shock. Okay. Helem, by the way, is yeah, it's usually I'm in shock, not like the if you're in shock, like something happened, like for example, when God forbid there's a missile attack and people are treated for shock, that's not the word that's usually used. It's not helem, it's usually charada. Charada, which is the word that we get from also the word for charedi, ultra-Orthodox, because it's someone who trembles before God, and charada is trembling or shaking, and that's the word we usually use for shock when it's like a medical term. But the helem, like I'm in shock that you said that to me, is helem. Okay. Yes, Rona has a great anecdote about asking people if they needed a magefa instead of a magevet. Magefa with a fe and magevet with a vet. Magefa is a plague with a fe. Magevet with a vet is a towel. So definitely two different things you don't want to mess up. Okay. Okay, we have a few other words that people are asking for. The word for lock. Okay, the word for lock is, sorry. Okay. Happy to, by the way, happy to translate these last few words, but as we've talked about in the last few weeks, I don't want this to become dictionary time. Dictionaries are bounding online, but there's just a few words here that I'll do. Okay. Man'ul is a lock, like a lock on the door. Okay. There was one other I wanted to get to because it was, okay. So this is an important one because this has been in the news quite a lot and it's going to be in the news for a little bit longer. Let me see if I can just copy and paste it here. There we go. Okay. So these two. Okay. So let me just transliterate these. Great. This is a great thing to note. Well, it's not great, but it's important to know. Hachmara. This first word here that we're doing here, right? Hachmara. Hachmara is from the word, we have a lot of different words that come from this. Chamur. Chamur is, something is chamur, it's grave, G-R-A-V-E. Lehachmir, which is the infinitive form of this verb, means to make something stronger, to make it harsh, to make it more strict, more stringent. Hachmara is making something stricter. It's the act of strengthening, and that's what we're talking about now with the segel, right? That there's a government meeting, if it's not today, in the next few days, about achmarat hasegel, or achmarat anchayot, to make the either the lockdown or the guidelines around it, the ordinances around it, stringent, more strict, because of the alarming rate and increase in severe cases. And then this other part that was asked, and this is very important because you're going to see this a lot. We've seen this before leading up to the recent segel. Besegel bilti nimnat. Segel is, as we said, lockdown. Bilti comes from the same word as bli. It's best translated as un dash or in or non, like this, right? Bilti, best translate that. Bilti nimna. Besegel bilti nimna. Nimna is abstained. Abstain. When you see, for example, if you watch Knesset voting, when they have a plenary vote and they light up on that screen that looks like it's 1975, and they say how people voted, right? They voted for, ba'ad, against, neged, or abstained, nimna. Nimna means to abstain or to be prevented, but it means to abstain. So it's, in this case, bilti nimna, unabstained, unavoidable is the best way to translate that. Bilti nimna, unavoidable. So it's saying that it's an unavoidable lockdown that we're under. Exactly right, unavoidable. Okay, but yeah, that's a very important one that we see quite a lot right now. And with regards to the decisions that are being made and so forth, that something was unavoidable to get to it. Okay. Just looking at the last few questions. Okay, any last questions before we break?
Please write unavoidable in Hebrew.
So I just did. Bilti nimna.
Echo.
That's the wrote. We'll write it again here in the chat window. Bilti nimna.
Ma? Oh.
In the chat window, you need to press on the chat window to see it. Bilti.
I see it. Eating again? Eating nima?
Bilti nimna. I wrote it in translation just before that.
I guess it didn't come on mine. I don't know. 80?
I wrote it again, just a second.
Okay.
Bilti nimna.
Oh, okay, there it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How do you use the verb la'atzor to mean stop? Like, in what way do you use that to mean stop?
Okay, great question. So we've talked about this before. This is another example in Hebrew where there are two verbs that in English are translated exactly the same, but in Hebrew they have different uses. So we have two verbs that in English translate as to stop. La'atzor, like you just said, and lahafsik also means to stop. La'atzor means to stop in place, physically. So la'atzor is on stop signs in Israel, or it's a policeman waving you down at a machsom, a checkpoint, saying atzol, or itzri if you're a female, or itzru if you're in a group. But atzol means to stop where you are, meaning that you are moving in some manner and you're told to stop moving. Lahafsik has to deal with stopping a specific action that you're doing. So if you're telling someone stop smoking, tafsik la'ashen, you're commanding them tafsik la'ashen. Or tafsik can't be just said on its own. You can't just say to someone tafsik. It's like you're implying that you're asking them to stop a specific activity. So you can't just say it like in general, you're usually looking at the person, if not saying directly what they're doing that needs to be stopped. So if it's smoking or talking or whatever it is you want them to stop, you can say just tafsik to them, but you're making eye contact with them with whatever they're doing to make sure they stop doing that action, not stopping in place, because it may not be they have to move to do that action. But yes, la'atzor really has to do with stopping movement. That's a great question. You hear that word a lot.
Jay, it's Miri.
Yes.
Okay. Last week you never wrote the vowels for the very bad word that if someone is ever telling me to do something to myself, I want to know if they're saying that to me. So at some point, I'd like you to give us the vowels. And if you have to change it because I'm a female, I just want to make sure I know if someone is ever saying that to me. The FU. For the other three curses last week, you gave us the vowels. You didn't give us the vowels for FU.
Miri, it seems like he's frozen. So let's send him an email after this.
Okay, well, I put it in the chat twice, but okay.
Yeah, we just can't type with vowels on our computers.
Yeah, but he gave us the vowel. Well, he told us the words, and he never told us that last week.
Okay, so we'll send an email after. So it looks like he is frozen. Just a reminder, I will be sending the recording following today's session, as well as a link to our next Cafe Oleh, which will be October 19th. So please note that we will not be having Cafe Oleh for the next couple of weeks. We will resume on October 19th. Great. Okay, so if that's it, Mar Chatima Tova to everyone. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you in October. Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.